This video series, Under Our City's Skin, looks into women's rights and investigates abortion laws in the state of Queensland, Australia. Please stay with us. Termination is considered a special health care matter under the Guardianship and Administration Act 2000. This means that a substitute decision maker for a pregnant woman with impaired capacity cannot give consent for termination.
In Queensland, it's not against the law to access an abortion anymore. Now, it never should have been a crime to make a decision about your own body and whether you want to continue with a pregnancy or not. But thankfully, 4 years ago, after many years of advocacy and many decades of work by so many people, it finally became legal to get an abortion, but it's still hard to afford one and it's still hard to access one. So whilst the states are in charge of the laws surrounding abortion, we'd like to see the Commonwealth step in and provide some more funds to make sure that people can actually afford to get an abortion when they need one, and that they can do so locally without having to travel hundreds of kilometres to try to get to a centre that will provide the services they need. So yes, it's legal now, but it's still not accessible or affordable. That's something that needs to be fixed. And we're working on that federally, and we hope that the new government takes this issue seriously and steps up and delivers for women.
Termination of pregnancy, you might know this as abortion, is a procedure that ends a pregnancy. In Queensland, women who are up to 22 weeks pregnant may request a termination for any reason without disclosing the reason to the doctor. A termination may be performed after 22 weeks if two medical practitioners agree that in all circumstances the termination should be performed. There are two different methods of termination performed in Queensland, known as a medical termination and a surgical termination. After legislation changes came into effect on the 3rd of December 2018, women in Queensland can now legally access termination of pregnancy services. In the Termination of Pregnancy Act 2018, it ensures termination of pregnancy is treated as a health issue rather than a criminal issue. The Act supports women's rights to health, including reproductive health and autonomy. It provides clarity and safety for health practitioners providing termination of pregnancy, and it brings Queensland legislation in line with other Australian jurisdiction.
Well, we had a really positive change about 4 years ago, which finally removed abortion from the criminal code, which was about 120 years too late, but that was a real revolution to bring our healthcare laws into this century and ensure that women who want a termination can get one without being worried about being criminalised or being sent to prison. So that was a really positive move, but what we still see are barriers to access. It's still really hard to access an abortion, and it's still really hard to do so affordably. So I've established a Senate inquiry to look from the federal level about the extent of this problem, about how bad access and affordability is, particularly in rural and regional areas, and looking at ways that the federal government can step in and help. Because now that the states have in the main fixed the problems with the law, we now need to make sure that hospitals, GPs can actually provide the full range of reproductive health services to women when they need them. And that will require some Commonwealth dollars. So we'd love to see the Commonwealth list abortion as a Medicare item. That means that people can get abortions without having an out-of-pocket fee. They can just use their Medicare card. We'd also like to see that public hospitals provide abortion termination services just as a matter of course.
Termination of pregnancy in Australia is actually quite common. Up to 1 in 3 Australian women will choose to have a termination in their lifetime. It is important that Queensland women have access to information on how to safely access termination of pregnancy services. Half of Australian women experience an unplanned pregnancy in their lifetime. If you are pregnant and you're not sure you want to continue with the pregnancy, know that this is something that many women go through, and there is support available for you. If you are pregnant, there are 3 different options you have: termination, parenting, and adoption. To access a termination in Queensland, you can either consult a termination provider, a clinic, to book an appointment, or you can visit your GP for a referral for the appropriate clinic. You do not have to attend counselling before you have a termination in Queensland. However, you may wish to do so. Most providers will offer counseling services that you can use before or after the procedure if you would like to speak to someone about how you're feeling about your decision or the procedure itself. It is completely up to you whether you tell people about your decision to terminate a pregnancy. This includes your partner or the man involved in the pregnancy, your family or your workplace can help to talk to someone you trust while you are making a decision. And if you have a termination, you can talk to someone throughout the process.
So there are definitely improvements that could be made to the current legislation, and we actually are working with the Queensland Government to see how we could potentially do some of those. One of the improvements could be that looking at nurse-led models of care. So at the moment, there's only certain health professionals that can actually perform an abortion. However, if we were to allow nurses to be able to perform abortions, they'd be able to provide early medical abortions to people, which would really increase access in regional Queensland especially, and to places that only have nurses, such as sexual health clinics. We also think that there are some parts of the legislation that could be looked at into how they're actually working in practice. Conscientious objection is a really good example of that, where it's meant to balance the rights of the health practitioner with the person accessing an abortion. However, what we've found is that it's actually balancing more towards the rights of the health practitioner. And there are some other bits of legislation that we'd really like to look at harmonising across states and territories. For example, our gestational limit in Queensland is 22 weeks, whereas in other jurisdictions it's 24 weeks, and some don't have a gestational limit at all. So it's a bit confusing because across Australia we've got patchy legislation that's really different, and for a member of the general public, they don't really understand how or why they can access different forms of healthcare in different states and territories. So we'd really like to see a bit more harmonisation. We do think that at the time the legislation was good. We did sort of have a bit of hand in giving feedback and consultation and a submission to that legislation, and we were happy with it being passed how it was. But certainly thinking about what it looks like 4 to 5 years' time, we know that it's not quite working as it was supposed to. So I think that there are a few tweaks that could be done that would lead to really good outcomes for people who are trying to access abortion in Queensland.
The cost of termination depends on how many weeks pregnant you are, or whether you have a medical or a surgical termination, your location, and the service provider. If you are unable to afford termination services, Children by Choice has a financial assistance program for disadvantaged women seeking a termination, which can include women on low incomes, without access to financial resources, or those living in regional and remote areas. If you are living in regional or remote Queensland, you will need to travel to access termination services, or you may be eligible to access Queensland Health's Patient Travel Subsidy Scheme. Talk to your GP or your local hospital about your eligibility and how to get a referral. I invite you to watch the next video in the series, where we will discuss abortion with experts from different fields and take a deeper look.
There's a number of issues with that legislation that still exist. Hospitals are still able to use conscientious objection laws for particular doctors to be able to refuse services. We know that there are religious hospitals that get public funding that are refusing people abortion services, but also other kind of contraceptive services based on their religious beliefs. And there's no additional funding that has been put into the healthcare system to offer abortion services. So even though abortion was legalised in 2018, for a lot of people, a huge barrier still exists in terms of maybe geographic access or cost access. So regardless of whether or not it's legal on paper, for a lot of people, it's just not available. And this is the decision that the government made. They said after that was legalised that they didn't put any additional funding in, and the situation has gotten quite bad in Queensland. We know it's basically a postcode lottery. Depending on where you are in the state will influence very heavily whether or not you'll be able to get access to an abortion quickly and cheaply as well. We know a lot of people are forced to go through private providers. There's some really great private providers that do provide subsidised services, but a lot of people are still paying a lot of money. Maybe they're also paying for transport or accommodation costs. Maybe they have to travel to another city and leave their family and perhaps their other kids behind. And so this is a huge barrier. And Also, there's just the referral pathways for people who need an abortion. Where do you go? Do you go to your GP? Do you go to your public hospital? That's really not clear. And these are some of the things that we need to sort out in Queensland if we want to make abortion genuinely safe, legal and free for everyone. There are some big issues with our healthcare system that need to be addressed.
If you're under 18 and you are pregnant, you are legally allowed to have a termination with or without your parent or guardian's consent. In Queensland, women under 18 can legally have a termination if they are unable to show maturity or understanding about the procedure and their decision. A doctor may encourage you to involve your parents or guardian in the consultation or treatments if the doctor believes that it's in your best interests. However, the decision is ultimately up to you. If a woman under 18 is not able to show they have the maturity to consent to treatment, the Supreme Court of Queensland may authorize a termination if it's in their best interest. A parent or guardian cannot give consent in these circumstances.
However, in reality, there's a different story in terms of what is taking place and what I'm hearing from a lot of youth workers and a lot of young people in communities. And that's some of the issues that are a little bit hidden to public. And for example, over the last couple of decades, government has cut funding to many youth agencies. So what used to be known as secular youth work has been reduced. And what has stepped in is a lot of faith-based support for young people, and those faith-based, by that predominantly I mean Christian, through the church, so churches funding youth work, and all through from the schools having chaplaincy by Christian workers to organizations in the community that provide support for young people. However, that support does not always translate to providing young people with their full options to make a full informed decision on some of the life issues. And in particular, one of those issues is around sexuality. So, and abortion falls within that. So at the same time as they won't promote or hand out condoms or other sexual health sort of prevention, whether information or actual services, they also do not provide, and I'm generalizing here, and I also want to say that some of those Christian youth workers do actually provide the information and support young people, but in general, majority of them don't. And they, based on their belief, they do not want to provide that information, and so the young people that they work with do not become informed of their full available choices available to them. So they're not making informed decision during when they fall pregnant, and most of them, they will be going through full pregnancy. And as I said before, the situation of children having children continues. So that's one of the difficulties that we have, that in terms of sometimes laws, we can just celebrate and say, well, we've now, it's been legalized and that's the end of the story, but it's not. Sometimes with those things, it's about how those laws are then applied in the community, and the government has a responsibility to ensure that all sectors of the community have that right explained to them in whatever shape that takes, and that access is universal to all people, including.
We are at the beginning of a new era, and I would love to invite you to watch the next episodes of the TV series, which will be presented shortly. Under Our City's Skin TV series, we'll look into a different issue of women's rights in each episode. Goodbye for now.